So we come today in our gospel story to the third of the 4 weeks in a row when we hear these stories from the Gospel of John. These beautiful stories. John tells us these stories one after another, and each has its own theme. But you have a sense, particularly when you hear it read as it's been read these last 2 weeks in parts, you have a feeling that this is really a prelude to the great story that he's going to tell us in Holy Week. That long, complex story with so many characters in it, and each playing their own role, trying to come to terms with what the event is at hand. These are kind of a prelude to all that. The overarching theme that John has in this gospel is that the world is a dark place, and that Christ has come as the light of the world. And Christ comes and encounters people, encounters you and me, and encounters these particular people who have been part of these stories that we've heard. Christ comes and encounters Nicodemus in the middle of the night, and they have that exchange. And Nicodemus leaves in a sort of unresolved way. And the question we're left with that story is, what does it mean to be born again? Because you remember that was the theme of Jesus' exchange with Nicodemus. And then we have the story of the Samaritan woman. And that one is not so unresolved. That one, this Samaritan woman, fully engages in the conversation with Jesus, fully nudges him and nudges us, and they nudge each other to an understanding of the living waters that Jesus offers, the ones that well up and become a fountain of life within us, he says. And the woman gets it and becomes herself a disciple on his behalf. And so we have today's story. If last week's story is about the living waters, what that means, then today's story clearly is about what does it mean to have sight. It has this story today is more complex than the others. The others have been just dialogues between two people for the most part. Today, we had, as you heard, a variety of characters. We have Jesus, whose role is actually pretty minor, and we have the man born blind, and we have the neighbors who are consulted, and then some other neighbors, and then we have his parents, and then we have some Pharisees, and then we have some other Pharisees. And it's a symbol of how this light comes into the world and involves a community trying to come to terms with what it means to have the light shining in the darkness, and what it means to have sight, really. And the man born blind is such a wonderful character in this story. He doesn't ask to be healed. Jesus just heals him. And he doesn't become anything spectacular. He just seems like he's the same old guy. And they say, well, weren't you a beggar? And he says, well, yeah, that was me. And, well, how did it happen? I don't know. He put mud on my eye, told me to go get in the pool, and I went, and then I was healed. And then he has that wonderful exchange with the Pharisees, and they say, well, tell us again what happened. And he he says, why? Do you want to become his disciples? And then he says, this is an amazing thing. Nobody's ever done this in the history of the world. And you can't see what's going on before your very eyes. And then he has the engagement with Jesus again at the end, where Jesus resolves the story about what it's really about the coming of light into the world, and he is to live now in that light. There's an interesting thing about this story. The man doesn't have a name. And of course, the Samaritan didn't have a name either last week. Nicodemus had a name the week before that. This man doesn't have a name. He's always called the man born blind. Or he's called the man who used to be a beggar. Or the man who was blind, or the man who begged. He's called that by everybody in the story and the storyteller. He's not called that by himself, nor is he called that by Jesus. Because for himself and for Jesus, what matters is not what he was before this. It is not that he was born blind. It is not that he was a beggar. That is now his identity. His identity now is the man who was given sight. The man who has been set free. The man who has a new life. The man who, in the words of our gospel 2 weeks ago, the man who has been born again. He has been born again, and that's the point. That his life begins afresh. He is a new person because of what has happened.